You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 11th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, can King Abdullah of Jordan change Donald Trump's mind over Gaza? The US president will host the monarch today, having just suggested that the ceasefire should be scrapped and all hell should break loose. Also ahead,
the American security blanket has allowed European security to atrophy. And again, the point is not we want to abandon Europe. The point is we need to focus as a country on East Asia, and we need our European allies to step up in Europe.
JD Vance heads to Europe alongside Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio. We'll ask, is Europe prepared for Trump's three wingmen to visit all at once? Our head of radio will join us from the Dubai Government Summit, and we'll discover why no one wants to get married anymore in China. Plus,
and that family was about joy. And then the loss that occurs can be felt in a very singular manner in each one of them.
The director of I'm Still Here explains the personal nature of storytelling. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. A group led by Elon Musk has made a bid worth $97 billion to buy OpenAI. The Greek island of Santorini has been hit by the most powerful earthquake yet in the latest series of tremors, and at least one person has died after a business jet skidded off the runway while landing at Scottsdale Airport in Arizona. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, the US President Donald Trump has said all hell should break loose if Hamas doesn't release all of its hostages by midday this Saturday. Trump called for the ceasefire with Israel to be cancelled if the militia group doesn't comply with his demands. His comments were made just as Jordan's King Abdullah arrives in Washington. At the invitation of Donald Trump, the king will visit the White House, wondering perhaps what's on the cards. Well, I'm joined now from Amman by Burcu Ozcelik, who's a Senior Research Fellow of Middle East Security at the Royal United Services Institute, and by Natasha Lindstedt, Professor of Government at the University of Essex. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hello.
Burcu, if we may begin with you, this comment from Donald Trump in the last few hours about all hell should break loose if Hamas doesn't release all its hostages by midday on Saturday. How is that being received in Jordan?
Well, it's being received with a high level of concern, and this is it's perceived as a very dangerous moment ripe with uncertainty. And with King Abdullah in the US and slated to meet with President Trump in the White House today, I think it would be fair to say that the feeling in Amman is that the hearts and minds of the people here are with the king and are hoping for a positive, a constructive outcome from the meeting in the series of discussions today. But there's a lot of questioning and introspection here in Amman about the future of the partnership with the United States. Jordan, of course, has been a key strategic ally to the United States, both in terms of security cooperation, counterterrorism, and border security management issues, which serve U.S. national security interests in the Middle East. So the question from Amman is, who are our allies at this critical juncture where the Middle East appears to be shifting in unknowable ways? But it's a moment of concern and tension here, and all eyes and ears will be glued to follow what comes from this meeting today.
I was staying with you, Burcu. King Abdullah finds himself in an absolutely impossible situation, doesn't he?
He does. There's an immense amount of pressure domestically, a high level of expectation in terms of Jordan continuing to defend the rights of the Palestinian people, their internationally enshrined right to self-determination. Jordan has long expressed that it will not be an alternative homeland for the Palestinians, as the term goes. And this is seen, the forcible transfer of Palestinians into Jordanian territory is seen as a red line. It's been described as an existential threat to Jordan's national identity and its own security. Jordan, of course, along with Egypt, hosts hundreds of thousands of refugees, chiefly from Palestine, but other regional states as well. So Jordan has been under a huge amount of pressure from economically, from hosting a large number of refugees. It was a key ally in the fight against ISIS or Daesh. So Jordan feels as though it has done a lot in this relationship and now is hoping for a more positive response from President Trump. But of course, that it looks to be quite unlikely given the inflammatory rhetoric that we've been hearing from President Trump's White House in terms of his plans for Gaza as the Riviera of the Middle East. This is very concerning from Amman as well as from the Egyptian perspectives.
Let's bring you in, Natasha, and just listening to what Burcu was talking about, red lines, existential threats. These are things which would have had some words of some consequence pre-Donald Trump, but we're now talking about a president who's wanting to build. He says, I could make a deal with Jordan. I could make a deal with Egypt. We give them billions and billions a year. Those who are being removed from the Gaza Strip would have no right of return. There don't seem to be any recognisable parameters with this, do there?
No, Trump doesn't understand anything about international relations, international law, and the fact that these changes are flying in the face of decades of U.S. foreign policy support of a two-state solution, the fact that his suggestion basically violates the Geneva Convention, it's a violation of international law, and also the fact that he in his past administration had claimed there would be no new wars. I mean, it's essentially ethnic cleansing. And as Burcu mentioned, the last thing the Palestinians want is this alternative homeland solution. The Gazans have already been displaced numerous times. 90% of them are already internally displaced and living in really desperate circumstances. And Trump, meanwhile, just sees everything as a business deal. And he sees countries as valuable real estate. He said something kind of similar about North Korea during his first term, that he would transform it into this valuable real estate. And so that's where he comes up with this idea of the Riviera of the Middle East. But we have no idea who would live there. When a reporter asked him that, he basically said the world. He doesn't explain how Gazans would be moved. He doesn't explain how Hamas would be dealt with. He doesn't explain who's going to do all the rebuilding efforts, how they'd be resettled. Then he said the U.S. would seize control of Gaza, possibly permanently, and that the other nations might finance all this resettlement. But there's so many unknowns, and actually it caught many within his inner circle off guard. It was one of these off-the-cuff types of remarks, but now he's going with it, and he keeps repeating it. It's not the first time he said it. The first time was in January 25th phone call. He asked or told it basically King Abdullah that this is what his plans were, and I think there were some that thought he was going to backtrack on this because there was a lot of Republican even pushing back on this, but he just keeps going with it, that this is what the U.S. is going to do, and of course it's going to have real and scary consequences for the region.
Burcu, we have the Egyptian foreign minister in Washington as well, and he said that the importance of expediting reconstruction while Palestinians remained there was absolutely essential. Egypt is pushing back. Jordan, we are expecting King Abdullah to push back. What sort of regional power is there which could actually mount a collective resistance to what's going on here?
Well, I think what we have seen over the course of the past week or so since the inception of this so-called plan that Trump has put forward, we've seen a unified consensus view across the Muslim world, across the Middle East, that has harshly condemned this plan. And in fact, Turkish President Erdogan, speaking a few days ago, brushed it aside and dismissed it, saying there's really nothing there to talk about. This is not a plan at all. It's unthinkable, inconceivable that this would play out. But putting this plan out there and standing behind it, Trump has not backtracked yet. Presumably, he might do, he might not. We don't know. It's dangerous though that we're having to play this guessing game in terms of how sincere is Trump in this plan. But in terms of the Arab world's response, there has been a harsh, strong, repeated condemnation, a re-emphasis on the need for a two-state solution. But I think now, with King Abdullah in Washington and potentially President al-Sisi slated to meet President Trump as well in the coming days, I think this is a moment of opportunity for the Arab world, for the Muslim world, to propose an alternative. And we have, of course, spoken at length about the Oslo Accords, the Oslo process, the two-state solution. But what can the Arab world, and in addition to this, Turkey, which has been a vocal proponent and advocate of Palestinian rights, what can the region do now urgently to achieve a political settlement and secure the rights of the Palestinian people and to ensure stability for Gaza and security for Israel? I think the King Abdullah today is expected to, and certainly there's a sense of anticipation inside Jordan that he will come up with a sort of a creative alternative plan that will challenge President Trump and that will potentially forge a new path forward. What that will look like, we do not yet know, unfortunately. There have been several ideas floated around by states such as Qatar, by the UAE, by Jordan, but there doesn't seem to be a firm Arab plan for what for the future of Gaza might look like beyond the two-state solution. And so I think there's a real chance here for Arab agency to play a central and leading role in what comes next. And I sense that what Trump has said might, in his mind, be a sort of an opening act of a series of negotiations whereby he is now putting the ball back in the Arab world's court and suggesting, well, if you do not like what I am proposing, what's your plan then? And so there's a huge amount of pressure in the Arab world to deliver on the promise to aid the Palestinian people in this moment of great difficulty and challenge. But we need to see what that looks like. And I think there's a high level of expectation around that.
Briefly, Natasha, will that alternative or any alternative vision work when what we have seen working is the likes of Volodymyr Zelensky going to the US proposition, going to talks to the United States saying, we can give you deposits of rare earths. There is a sort of an entirely transactional nature to successful deal making with Trump at the moment.
Oh, exactly. I mean, he is completely transactional. He doesn't have any ideology. He doesn't, as I mentioned before, he doesn't really understand the way international alliances work. We see with the recent pause on the tariffs for a month on Canada and Mexico, I mean, two huge U.S. allies and two of the U.S.'s biggest trading partners, that they come up with some sort of proposal and then he puts a pause on it. I mean, he's threatening a lot of different countries at the moment, not just Mexico and Canada to be the 51st state. He's threatening Greenland. He's threatening Panama constantly, and other Latin American countries like Colombia. And so I think he thinks if he can get some kind of concession out of these countries, and it's a good, not necessarily like a photo op, but that the optics are good beyond this, around this, that's some sort of win that he can sell to the American public, that he's putting America first. So I think this is another example of where he's trying to get some kind of concession out of the Middle East here. Maybe in the end, Saudi-Israeli normalization. I know that's important to him, but it's hard to predict obviously what his motivations are, but I think he's trying to get some kind of deal.
Burcu Ozcelik in Amman and Natasha Lindstedt, thank you both so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Nearly 8:15 in Berlin, 7:15 here in London. Now, three of Donald Donald Trump's team will make separate visits to Europe this week, pushing their President's America First agenda. Vice President J.D. Vance is at the AI summit in France, and he'll be off to the Munich Security Conference. There he will join the Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Mr. Rubio will then travel to the Middle East. Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth is going to visit the headquarters of 2 US military commands in Germany. Then he'll be off to Belgium, and then he goes to Poland. Dr. Marian Mesmer, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House, joins me in the studio with a map. Well, not literally with a map, but can we map what these three men are going to try and do this week?
We can certainly try. I mean, it might have been useful had I actually brought a map. But, I mean, I think we haven't got a lot to go on with regards to their agenda, right? We know where they're headed, but there's quite a lot of concern about the messages that they might actually bring with them. So if we look at Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, he very purposefully said he's skipping Munich Security Conference on purpose, essentially saying he would prefer to spend time with US troops rather than time at cocktail parties, which, to be fair, is not really the vibe of the Munich Security Conference anyway, but I thought that was quite an interesting remark before he goes on his tour of Europe. And
slightly belittles the perception of the security conference, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so I'm wondering, and I think a lot of people in Europe are quite concerned about what kind of messages about US savings and US military commitments moving elsewhere he might be bringing with him.
We've also already heard Marco Rubio at the beginning of this, J.D. Vance at the beginning of this programme talking about how it was time for Europe to step up with its commitment to protecting its own and protecting its own kind while the US has other business on. Is that a very directed message to Europe saying, do not count on the United States to help with Ukraine as much?
It is a repeated message that the Trump administration has been repeating for weeks and including on the campaign trail, but it's not a very clear message in terms of what exactly it will mean. It could essentially mean continue on as you have in terms of increasing the amount of investment in European defense spending, because European states are doing much more now than during Trump's first time when this message came up for the first time. But it could also mean that they intend to withdraw US troops by the end of the year and that Europe will be on its own. And I think it's the vast difference between those two messages that Europeans are very worried about.
Indeed, and I think we've had some news. I think it's come from the FT this morning, or the Times. The Trump administration wants to push its allies in Europe to buy more American weapons for Ukraine. That's ahead of any potential peace talks with Moscow. I mean, we've just talked about the Middle East and how everything is now transactional. Could it be as simple as, if you buy more American military equipment, then the US will help? Or rather, if you don't, it won't?
It might very well be that. We just heard earlier that Trump is very transactional, and that's perhaps the one red thread that's been running through all of his various proclamations and policy plans, if you can call them that. But I think for European states, it's not necessarily as easy as that, because while I think there would be capacity to make some orders from US defense companies, a huge part of the effort over the last few years has been building domestic defense production up in Europe. And so I think there's actually a lot more investment that's needed there as well. So if European states are looking at either keeping the US on side by purchasing American or strengthening European defense industry by purchasing European products, that's not a very straightforward trade-off.
Let's focus a little bit on each country. We have Hegseth in particularly going, as you said, going to these military bases in the US. How is Germany going to welcome him?
Well, I think the German government is essentially in quite a tricky position at the moment, because there's going to be elections in a few weeks' time, and so that could mean that they are in their last weeks of governing. So they will probably try to do their best to set up a positive relationship with the Trump administration as much as possible, in the hope that they might still be in power in March, but it could also be that actually they are essentially just handing over the relationship to another party. And if we look at the relationship that Angela Merkel had with Trump, it was quite an uneasy one. I mean, they went head to head over NATO and over defense spending quite a few times, Christian Democrats, Merkel's party, are one of the parties that could potentially be in the next government. So if that is the case again, Trump is someone who holds grudges quite well. So if he associates Merkel's party with Merkel, then that could set the German government up in not a great position in terms of deal making with Trump.
And moving on to France, we have JD Vance at the AI summit in Paris. The US is trying to jostle, like many other nations, for power inside the Grand Palais. Everybody's in there at the AI conference. The Chinese are in there. There is intended to be the signing of a joint declaration on the future and sort of commitment to principles of AI being signed later. Do we think that America is going to sign it?
I'm honestly not sure on this one, because everything we've seen on AI policy from the Trump administration so far has actually been a change in how the Biden administration had approached it. So we had been approaching this convergence on AI safety, reliability, those kind of big trend lines. Countries still had very different approaches. I mean, the EU regulatory approach is very different from the US approach, but there was this general understanding that as we are developing AI, it should be safe and reliable. Whereas the Trump administration is likely going in a different direction with that, focusing much more on moving quickly, getting their technology out there and so on. And so I'm not sure that this is something that they will want to put any political capital into. And
just looking at the general foreign policy approach by the White House, I mean, obviously we see Vance and Hegseth emerging from the boss's shadow and striking out in abroad for their first international visits. But how often do we see, a vice president, a secretary of state and a defence secretary, all sort of in inverted commas, doing Europe in 3 or 4 days, almost as if once we've done it, we don't have to go back there again, and treating Europe as if it's something that you just need to sort of do a quick clean sweep of and then you can forget and move on. Is that an accurate assumption or assessment of how we might see the White House looking at Europe from now on?
That's certainly how it seems it might be. I mean, it's not that unusual to have a big US delegation traveling, especially when there's a lot going on, like these various international summits. But at the same time, all of the messaging has been slightly dismissive. And you're right in saying that the tone feels a little patronizing. And there's really seems to be this pivot within the Trump administration of wanting to focus on China. And so, I mean, if we look at the Pentagon, they have appointed so many people who are quite hawkish on China and not that interested in Europe at all. So I think that that's a pivot that is going on very much at the moment, and perhaps more traditional Republican voices that would have been interested in also maintaining good relations with Europe are not as present in this administration.
Marion Messmer, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. Still to come on today's programme.
I'm Sheena Rossiter, and today I'll be talking about the latest news in urbanism and how Trump's executive actions are impacting electric vehicle funding in American cities, and also the loss of an urban planning legend.
Stay with us. It's all to come on The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:23 here in London. Let's continue with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Monocle writer and researcher Julia Lassica. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I can't tell you how well wrapped up this woman is. It is miserable out there.
It's horrible, yeah. I had to have like an extra layer of cashmere just to keep me warm.
That's the most Monocle thing I've ever heard. I needed an extra. We all need an extra. Who doesn't benefit from an extra layer of cashmere? Thank you for that. I hope that has helped you focus your thoughts on the papers. What have you spotted?
Okay, well, the first story is from a Ukrainian news website, Ukrinform, and it's about Zelensky revealing details of Ukrainian military contracts for younger adults, 18 to 24-year-olds. This is a huge story. It's sort of been dominating headlines in the last few months because the US administration and some voices in Europe have been putting a lot of pressure on Ukraine to recruit their younger citizens, and Ukrainians have really pushed back. They've really, really resented this idea that they have to send their young generation off to war. They want to keep them and allow them to sort of develop without the pressures of active military service, as it should be in any civilized country, really. But now they're developing these plans, I guess, in some ways to, keep at bay the new administration who are putting a lot of pressure on them. And so some of the benefits that include Ukrainian younger people signing up are $1 million hryvnia salary, which is about $24,000, which is dollars, which is quite a lot annually in Ukraine, 0% interest mortgage rates, as well as free higher education, so ways to entice Ukrainians into the army.
And how is it, you said it's obviously a huge story, but how is this being received in Ukraine? Because there is this dreadful necessity for more fighters, for more men.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because in the last week, there were quite a few different sort of opinion pieces and comment pieces in Western papers, which were, Ukraine is running out of men, and so they're turning to drones to protect their front line. And lots of Ukrainians are saying, well, that's funny because actually the way you should fight a war is not with men, but with machines. You shouldn't be sending your men or your women out onto the front line. The way it's being received in Ukraine is that there's a lot of tension right now in Ukraine to do with mobilization. Recruitment centers are actually being attacked sort of every other day, every day. This is part of a blackmail sabotage plot by Russia to sort of destabilize Ukrainian society, where they'll, contact a member of Ukrainian society and sort of blackmail them into bombing a recruitment centre or something like that. It's awful. It's an absolutely awful phenomenon. But there's a lot of resentment. Ukrainians really don't want to send off their best young people to war. They want to keep them, allow them to live a normal life for as long as possible, because it just feels like in Ukraine, you throw a generation after generation of men and women out to defend themselves against Russia. And could we not save this one at least?
Indeed, and preserve them for rebuilding the city for the next generation.
Exactly.
Let's move to another article that you wanted to bring our attention to, again to do with Ukraine and to do with drone attacks. This is from Radio Free Europe. And this increase in the amount of drone-based action from the Ukrainians. This time they're attacking a Russian oil refinery.
Yes. Well, this is the grand strategy. Over 2024, it was sporadic. Every now and then, Ukrainians would attack these oil refineries and gas refineries in Russia. But now, in January, it's increased up to 3 times of what it was in December and November. So it's a huge increase. And it's having a very big impact on the Russian economy. Total oil processing in Russia has dipped to its lowest level since 2012. And the Russian economy really sits on gas and oil exports. That's why we see their shadow fleet going out across the world, shipping out their products, evading sanctions. And the Express, actually, in London, quoted a senior British military intelligence officer yesterday who said that as a result of Ukrainian attacks, not only the military will suffer, and, this attack that we just saw now, it supplies oil to the Russian military, but also Russia's economy could actually collapse in 2026 as a result.
Is there a genuine thought that could happen? Because quite a lot of the thought is that Russia has actually done rather well from the war in terms of finding new markets to send its oil to.
Yes, but you actually see customers in India and in China saying no to Russian gas and oil now because of what's happening, because of this effect and the effect on Russian tankers as well that are making their way around the globe.
OK, let's move on to a story that you've spotted in the Moscow Times about Azerbaijan banning entry to a Russian politician.
Yes, so this is a Russian State Duma lawmaker, Nikolai Valuyev, who is an quite abhorrent individual anyway, so he should probably have been banned a long time ago. But he has offended Azerbaijan because he suggested that the South Caucasian country uses diaspora groups to engage in criminal activities. But this is part of a larger spat between Azerbaijan and Russia that has just been growing and growing since December, when an Azerbaijan plane was shot down by Russian air defense by mistake. And, Azerbaijan has now sent $40 million to Ukraine in humanitarian aid, and has also said to Russia that if they don't issue a formal, clear apology, they will take them to international court.
Finally, let's move to Poland. And I don't know what you think, but when I think of eating a Neapolitan pizza, I think that I'm eating it in Naples. But I'm wrong, aren't I?
Yes, a slight shift in tone from the previous stories. But Poland's hospitality scene is just blossoming, and this is one that's very close to my heart. I love going to different Polish restaurants when I'm there on work trips for Monocle. But yes, this is a pizzeria in Pabianice, Poland, which is quite, a small town. It's not Warsaw or Gdańsk, but it has been named the best place in the world for a Neapolitan pizza. But the reason I picked this out was because, one of my favorite Japanese restaurants in the whole world is in Krakow. It's called the Tokyo Tower. If any of our listeners are in Krakow anytime soon, it's incredible. And, the number of Georgian bakeries and pizza and restaurants have risen, exponentially in Poland. So the Polish hospitality scene is just having a moment.
What I absolutely love about this article is that the gentleman who is running this was an architect. He says it took him 2 years to get his pizza making skills right through trial and error. That I absolutely love, because if I'd never heard of it as an example of perseverance, and also, can you imagine being a friend and family? For the first couple of visits, it's great, let's have a go at the pizzas, and then 20 months in, you've really, you're sick of the sight of a marinara.
Well, this is the zest for life that people, who used to be behind the Iron Curtain have now. It's that kind of, there's this feeling, for Ukrainians especially, but Poles as well, this feeling like, God, could this all end now? Let me quickly get out the country, learn all these beautiful European crafts that we've been shut off for so long. I was interviewing a sawmill owner for Monocle last year for a story, and his father has just gone to travel the world. He hasn't seen him in 2 years. He's just gone, hopping around different countries. Just he wants to see the world.
Julia Lassica, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:31. A quick look now at the headlines. A group led by Elon Musk has made a bid worth $97 billion to buy OpenAI. Mr. Musk co-founded OpenAI with its current chief executive Sam Altman in 2015, but left before the company took off after it released ChatGPT. The Greek island of Santorini has been hit by the most powerful earthquake yet in the latest series of tremors. The quake, measuring 5.3, was felt in Athens. More than 12,800 tremors have been felt in the past few weeks. And at least one person has died after a business jet skidded off the runway while landing at Scottsdale Airport in Arizona. The aircraft hit another plane that was parked nearby. At least 4 other people were injured in the crash. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 11:31 in Dubai, which is where we head next, because Monocle is in the Middle East at the Dubai World Government Summit. More than 30 heads of state, delegations from 140 nations and representatives from more than 80 international organisations are there. Joining me now from Dubai is Monocle's head of radio, Tom Edwards, where I believe it's a balmy 21 degrees. Tom, how are you coping?
I'm not managing too badly at all, Emma. I must say, after the challenges of a London winter, it is rather nice to see a bit of sunshine. And let me set the scene for you and our listeners. We're right in the heart of Madinat Jumeirah, so I'm looking out over a square. There's a mock-up of a futuristic tram in front of me. We're surrounded by the requisite palm trees, etc., and by other friends and colleagues from Global Media. We're just on the edge of the media village here, but right in the heart of World Government's Summit. It's the first day, the first morning, so there's a real good energy, Emma, about the place. I'm not sure whether I have so much energy, but I'm doing my best.
Well, we're mid-morning and there should be a good coffee somewhere to pep you up. I mean, before we go any further about why everyone's there, can you tell us, what does a futuristic tram look like?
It's a tram and it's futuristic, Emma. I can't call it better than that. It has no sharp edges. So it kind of looks dollopy almost, I'm going to say. I don't know if that's complimentary or not, but it does look like it's bearing straight towards our Monocle Radio booth. And speaking of that, we have a booth here. I've got colleagues, Al Samim, he's here alongside me, Emma Croft also from Monocle's here inside the studio, and then just but a short stone's throw away, the Monocle Cafe's here, staffed by our colleagues from the Zurich operation. So Monocle's got 2 footprints here at the centre of WGS, Emma.
That's brilliant to hear. So just tell us a little bit more about the Dubai World Government Summit, dollopy tram notwithstanding. Why the UAE and Dubai is moving apace in absolutely every single part of the world. So what are the big themes and the big ideas that people are focusing on this year?
Well, I think the headline, Emma, which I think is really interesting, is the nature of the opportunity in this space. You know, if we look around the world, especially if we look towards the Americas or to the US specifically, what's the conversation? It's about withdrawing aid, withdrawing cooperation. It's about increasing unilateralism. And it's amazing. There's almost a palpable sense here of engagement with diplomacy, with convening, with conversation, with the benefits of a multilateral approach to problem solving. We know as the world becomes ever more complex that it will require ever more complicated solutions to fix, and you need to bring everybody along with you. And so I think there's a real opportunity in a soft power sense for UAE, for Dubai to lead. And I think that's what the World Government Summit is all about. It's about convening leaders and innovators. We talk about blended finance models. This is kind of a blended diplomatic model. So public sector, private sector, lots of leaders in government from, and I think this is what this part of the world does particularly well. It's not like the WEF, where it's sometimes accused of being a little bit, the ambition's a bit lofty, it's a bit elitist, it's in the high Alps. Real engagement from the global south as well, and there's a real sense that they're bringing everybody along on the drive to find the solutions. I think in terms of thematics, surprise, surprise, Emma, AI is one of the things which, interestingly, whether you speak to people who are leaders in hospitality or government, infrastructure projects, mobility, whatever it is, heavy industry, AI does seem to be the topic that sort of reaches across all. So I'm having to up my game in terms of understanding how AI is going to be shaping our collective futures.
Monocle has a voice there too. We have our editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck. He's going to be moderating a few of these events, isn't he? And we also have our editorial director, Tyler Brulé, who I suspect may have a few things to say about AI.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe don't get him started on that one. Tyler's rolling into town tomorrow. He's part of a roundtable on the future of media. So again, I think no avoiding the thorny questions, but there'll be lots of optimism and lots of talk about opportunity from him. Andrew, as you say, is moderating a series of panels and fireside chats this afternoon. Those are primarily looking at leadership, synergic leadership, Emma. One for you.
Thank you.
But all will be revealed when Andrew. But he's got some great guests from hospitality, from the business management side as well, and it's just interesting as you look across this sort of courtyard where I'm standing. You never know who you're going to spot. Just yesterday at our cafe, the ruler of Dubai, Emma, popped up. Sheikh Maktoum himself, enjoying an Americano. For anyone who's interested to compare coffee tasting notes with the big fella. So it's amazing. There's serendipitous meetings. There's lots of structured, organised meetings, both in terms of within the main plenary sessions and then on the margins. There's a real sense that there's lots of consequential conversations happening wherever you look.
And if you are at the Dubai World Government Summit and you're desperate for it to be like the Sheikh and grab yourself a Monocle coffee, where can we find you?
Well, we're just sort of next to the media village. I would say to people, look for the bulbous tram. I think that's going to be the critical guiding part. We're just by the media village, adjacent to the sort of main entrances. It is huge, Emma. I don't know if I can quite do justice to all the different zones and sectors. But yeah, Monocle pretty well represented, so hopefully people will stop by. And if they've got something they're desperate to get off their chest, they can jump in the booth here with me and do an interview on Monocle Radio. So they should come and say hello. We've got a nice team here ready to sort of press the flesh and have some, again, more of those conversations I was mentioning.
Tom Edwards, we wish you all the best with your afternoon and your bulbous tram. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Dubai. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, the number of people getting married in China has dropped. Dramatically so, a fall of 20% in a single year in 2024. And to explain why, I'm joined now on the line by Steve Tsang, who's director of the China Institute at SOAS University of London. A very good morning. Welcome back, Steve. Good to have you with us.
Good morning, Emma.
So please just run us through the figures, please.
Well, what we have seen is, as you say, a drop of about 20% in marriage last year. In a sense, it is probably reflecting the zodiac cycle in the Chinese calendar. because 2014 was the year of the dragon, so you would have seen a rise of marriage the previous year so that people could have a child that would be born in the year of the dragon. And then what we can expect is that in the following year, then there is going to be a drop in the number of marriage because people got married ahead of time.
So there's been this slight peak because of the year of the dragon, but there is nonetheless that's the anomaly, isn't it, on a more general downward trend?
Oh, the general trend is absolutely in the downward direction. I think that reflects a whole lot of issues which are happening in China. Some of that is related to the economy, which is getting into a kind of structural difficulties. So the prospect for families are not getting so much better. And marriage in China is a very expensive affair. Basically, people want to marry, women would prefer to marry men who will be able to provide for a property, car, etc., etc. So if the prospect is not so good, they become less desirable marriage partners. Then you also have the reality that Chinese women are also becoming more independent, even though the overall economy is not so good, but they also don't want to be overly dependent on their husbands. So a lot of women in China are delaying marriage, and some of them are simply saying that I am not going to get married at all. I want to maintain my independence, particularly for professional women who actually are able to do that reasonably well.
Now, this drop in, or this gradual decline in marriage is inevitably going to have an effect on the number of children which are born, isn't it? Do we know what that is?
Well, the population drop is even more significant. China is substantially below replacement level. Your replacement level is at 2. China is at, I think, 1.1 or so, general ballpark. So you're talking about a population that is shrinking and shrinking at a fairly rapid rate. And China is not in the worst of that situation. In the birth rate, South Korea is much worse. I think it's more like 0.78 or that kind of figure. And the expectation is that China is moving in that direction, not necessarily overtaking South Korea. So moving forward, if we are looking at 5 years, the demographic changes on the Chinese economy is going to be fairly modest. But if we look at it in 20 years time frame, then the effect will be very, very substantial.
So let's deal with the approach by the Chinese authorities to fix both problems. Let's deal with the marriage issues first. I mean, there have been lots and lots of incentives offered by the Chinese authorities for people to get married, haven't they? I mean, why haven't they worked?
Well, because the kind of incentives that the Chinese governments provide really do not address the basic issues of why women in China do not want to get married. China is still not particularly friendly to the female half of the population. And with the economy being more open in terms of opportunities to women and women being better educated than men, you have more and more of your educated women who simply will not want to forsake their independence. So your government incentives of how you raise a family and all that are not going to have any effect on the women. It's not a problem of Chinese men not wanting to get married. There are plenty of Chinese men who want to get married. They just can't find the ladies to marry them.
There is that difficulty as well that there is a social stigma still attached to unmarried couples having children. So you might get a self-perpetuating problem that if you don't want to get married, then you're not going to have children.
Oh, that is absolutely also true. But that is, in a sense, your wider society problem, which is not being addressed by the current Chinese leadership. If anything, the supreme leader of China, Xi Jinping, is not being seen as a particularly women-friendly leader. There is no senior position at the top being held by women under Xi Jinping. His wife, who was a very, very distinguished singer with the rank of a major general in the PLA, somebody who was far more popular and better known than Xi Jinping before he became supreme leader, has largely faded out of scene and is now just a wife to the supreme leader and being used as decoration. That's not sending the right kind of message to women in China that you can make it, you can get married, you can be partner in a domestic situation and yet continue to flourish with your career.
Has anybody come up with an idea to reverse this that would actually be acceptable? Because what you describe requires fundamental cultural change.
Well, I am not aware of any plan by the Chinese government that will address this kind of issues. Chinese scholars are largely now required to come up with ideas and think of plans and studies which are patriotic, which essentially means that they are more supportive of the state than being critical of the state.
Steve Tsang, thank you so much, as ever, for joining us on Monocle Radio. That was Steve Tsang, Director of the China Institute at SOAS University of London. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
It's time to talk urbanism now. Sheena Rossiter is Monocle's contributing editor, joining us on the line from Edmonton, Canada. Good evening, Sheena.
Good evening.
Bring us up to date with the effect on our world's cities of Donald Trump and his executive orders.
Yeah, well, since he's been in office just in the past few weeks, he's ushered in a flurry of executive orders, and one of them has actually had a huge impact on urban mobility due to shifts in transport policy. So this is pretty serious because it could reshape how cities are planned for sustainable transportation, namely as we start to adopt a little bit more of electric vehicle adoption, or more commonly known as EV adoption, and the infrastructure that's necessary in order to have EVs on the road. So there's been a suspension of federal EV funding and also an elimination of mandates and other potential legal challenges that are going to remain uncertain for urban transit and clean energy initiatives in urban cities in the U.S.
This is a big change from the direction that everyone was taking, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the most important impacts that has happened was that Trump's executive actions. He just suspended $5 billion US for the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. And that's halted just all spending that's been allocated from federal funds to what was expected to be a large rollout of EV charging stations and critical expansion in just electric mobility in urban areas in general. So it's expected that that's what's happening in the public sector, but that's also going to likely discourage more private investment as well, because why would people want to invest in this type of infrastructure when the policy is so uncertain right now?
With some of Trump's other executive orders, there have been legal challenges which have put the brakes on. Is anything similar happening in this area?
Yeah, environmental groups and state governments, they've already indicated that they're looking to contest some of these moves in court, saying that it's undermining prior commitments to clean energy transportation and energy efficiency as well. Critics have warned also that halting EV infrastructure investments could have serious economic consequences like slower growth and in clean energy, but also in transportation sectors in general.
Let's move on to the loss of an absolute giant in the field of urban planning, a man called Shoop-Dog.
Yes, Donald Shoup. He died last Thursday at the age of 86. And he really made a really big impact on cities and urban planners in the past century. In fact, he was really up there with the likes of Jane Jacobs and many other great urbanists of the time, also Louis Mumford. So he was one of the 10 most influential planners of the last century, and he also was awarded in 2023 the Seaside Prize. Now, it's really interesting because he didn't actually come into this level of fame until he was 66 years old, and that's a time when a lot of practitioners and academics are kind of winding down their career, and he got into things through his 700-page book called The High Cost of Free Parking, and that really kind of explained the vital importance of parking spaces, and he really kind of went into this dry and technical topic of parking lots and spaces and garages. Well, since we're on the topic of transportation, but that is really what he became really well known for, and he really revitalized many cities through parking methods and parking reforms.
Sheena Rossiter on the line from Edmonton, Canada. Thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. You're listening to The Globalist. Finally, on today's programme, I'm Still Here is already one of the most successful Brazilian films ever made. It's been nominated for 3 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Actress for Fernanda Torres. The film tells the story of Eunice Paiva, a woman who turns activist after the disappearance of her husband during the country's military dictatorship. Well, the film is directed by the celebrated Brazilian director Walter Salles, and Monocle Radio's own resident Brazilian and senior correspondent Fernando Augusto Pacheco caught up with both Fernanda Torres and Walter Salles.
Walter Salles and Fernanda Torres, what a pleasure. As a Brazilian, I'm very happy. You've just been nominated for the Golden Globes as well. But let's talk about I'm Still Here. And my first question goes to you, Walter. I want to know your connection, actually, with the story, because it's been based on a book by Marcelo Rubens Paiva, but I know it's very close to your heart, right?
Yes, it definitely is personal to me as well. And when I was 13, 14, I became friends with this one family, the Paivas. Their house somehow became a place very dear to me. It was a place where we could discuss politics, where we heard music all the time. Somehow what pulsated in it was the possibility of another Brazil, because during that time we were living under military dictatorship. And then this house that represented the possibility of light to me was struck by a tragedy, and that family that I knew so well had to find ways to reinvent itself. And the mother of the 5 kids I was friends with had to find ways to construct a form of resilience and resistance that could allow the family as a whole to go through. So it's really about joy. It's about that joy that is robbed, and it's about finding ways to go on and living. It was very life-affirming, in many ways.
And Fernanda, I wonder if you ever met or how much you knew about Eunice Paiva, because, as Walter said about the resilience, that's the word for the character, because she's been through a lot. but you can see in her face how, she has kids, she has so much to deal with. It's incredible. But tell us about your connection, actually, with Eunice Paiva.
My connection, my first one was totally because of Marcelo Rubens Paiva, when he wrote his first book, and there was this mother, and I also knew that she was the widow of Rubens Paiva, who had been killed, but nobody had the details. Then finally Marcelo wrote this book, a book where the adult, discovered that his mother is the heroine of the family. And then I watched the interviews, and there was this mysterious woman that in a way guided us throughout the film. She was like persuasive, but always gentle, intelligent. She always had a smile, and she was never someone who would show off her personality or her desires. She's for real. So then when we started to make this film, from the beginning, Walter was like asking me. I remember the first thing I did, and he said, trust me, less. And he was always reminding me when I forgot about the smile and the subtraction. I think it's a movie that, perhaps because he was a documentarist and because he lived in that house, he wanted us to do and to be for real. And she was the guide that guided us in this, I think.
O que aconteceu? O meu marido está em perigo. Todo mundo está em perigo, Eunice.
So in some ways, Walter, the film feels as fresh as ever, as current in its themes as well. But I think one thing you do very well in your films, you keep it personal. It is about politics, but I think when you do like a personal story of the Paiva family, I think any Brazilian can understand that. If you're from the right, from the left, what do you have to say?
I think that Marcelo's book allowed us to understand what loss meant to every single member of his family. So you understand what loss represents through very personal experiences from one of the 5 kids, but also from the mother's point of view. I was reading the other day that you can only understand the magnitude of loss when you have experienced joy. And that family was about joy. And then the loss that occurs can be felt in a very singular manner in each one of them. And Fernanda's mother, the extraordinary Fernanda Montenegro, I think that taught all of us that every single, when you want to do a film that has a political penchant, you have first to talk about the human experience. So that's the channel. The channel is through the human and the existential, and with such extraordinary actors as Fernando Torres and Fernanda Montenegro, you understand what those characters are going through. And this is how you feel what's going on a human but also on a political standpoint.
Walter Salles talking and Fernando Torres talking to Fernando Augusto Pacheco, and I'm Still Here is out now in Brazil. That's all the time we have for today's programme. Thanks to all my guests and to the producers too. I'm Emma Nelson. Goodbye. Thank you very much indeed for listening.